All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts. The trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Women Uncovered, The Truth About Happiness and Insecurity, written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. The gynocentric doomsday cult, how the left's infinite spectrum of insanity, the state's war on male welfare, and your tolerance for casual cheating are destroying Western civilization one lie at a time. You have been sedated by a conspiracy of lies so vast, it makes the Tower of Babel look like a garden shed. You have been told that your instincts are toxic, that your history is a stain, and that your strength is a danger, all to pave the way for a degenerate utopia where feelings trump biology and weakness is a virtue. I am not here to coddle you with the sickly sweet lies of the modern therapist or the gender studies professor. I am here to hand you the cold, steel chisel of the trivium, so you can smash the facade of this modern Babylon and see the gears turning behind the curtain. We are going to dissect the pathology of the cheat in the casual game, that fractal of a fractured soul who reveals his unsuitability for the apprenticeship mastery ladder the moment the referee looks away. And we will prove via the syllogism that the man who cannot govern himself in a friendly competition is ontologically incapable of maintaining a republic based on natural law. Consider the gynocentric leviathan that feeds on your disposability, a state that has replaced the husband with a welfare check and the father with a restraining order, creating a system where your tax dollars subsidize the very hypergamy that leaves you lonely and destitute. We will drag the noble lie of psychology into the light, exposing it as a tool for the gamma male to subvert meritocracy. And we will laugh as we dismantle the absurdity of the infinite spectrum using the immutable law of identity, proving that a society that cannot define a woman cannot define justice. This is not a voyage, it is an exorcism. Prepare to have your mind scrubbed of the cultural Marxist filth that has clogged your synapses, because we are going to re-enshrine the transcendentals, the true, the good, and the beautiful, and we are going to do it by looking the wickedness of the modern world straight in the eye without flinching, the crucible of character, integrity, and the stoic soul. Consider the rec league basketball court sacred ground for the amateur athlete, a proving ground more honest than any corporate boardroom or academic committee. Last Tuesday, I witnessed a grown man, a financial advisor by trade, completely detonate over a foul call. Veins bulging, spittle flying, screaming obscenities at a volunteer referee who had simply observed a charging violation. This man, by all societal metrics, had succeeded. 6-figure income, corner office, respectable address. Yet in that moment his soul lay bare, a hollowed-out husk of performative success. He had never learned to govern the internal chaos because the external rewards had always arrived regardless. Contrast this grotesque display with his opponent, a tradesman who absorbed an objectively incorrect technical foul with a slight nod and quiet composure. One man revealed himself as a fracturing vessel of resentment. The other demonstrated the sine qua non of civilization, the capacity to suffer injustice without becoming unjust. This brings us to a practical method for separating wheat from chaff among male associates. Organize games, poker nights with real money, pickup games with actual scorekeeping, chess matches with time clocks. Make the stakes genuine enough to trigger the ego's defensive mechanisms, then observe. The man who cheats when losing, who argues rule technicalities to avoid admitting defeat, who projects blame onto cards or dice or referees. This man has revealed his ontological composition. He lacks the structural integrity to serve as a pillar in any meaningful enterprise. Filter him out before he penetrates your inner circle. The ancient apprenticeship model understood this implicitly. Mastery required years of observation, not merely of technical skill, but of character under pressure. The modern West, in its therapeutic infantilization, has abandoned this wisdom to its peril. The leftist psychological establishment has constructed what must rank among history's most insidious rhetorical frauds, the concept of toxic masculinity. Their assertion proceeds from a fundamentally corrupted premise, that male competitive drive represents a pathology requiring suppression. This constitutes a direct assault on the engine of transcendence itself. Competition separates truth from delusion, capability from pretense, honor from deceit. When you suppress overt competition among men, you do not eliminate it. You drive it underground, where it metastasizes into the passive-aggressive manipulation of the gamma male, that most dangerous creature in any social hierarchy. The gamma cannot win meritocratically, so he inverts the game, weaponizing social consensus against objective measurement. Sound familiar? This is precisely the operational methodology of cultural Marxism writ large. A man who cannot absorb a foul call in a meaningless rec league game will translate that characterological defect into every domain he touches. He will blame his wife for his own emotional incontinence. He will sabotage business partners to protect his fragile self-conception. He will vote for politicians who promise to punish those more competent than himself. The biological reality of testosterone responds to competitive setback with either aggressive adaptation or cortisol-soaked withdrawal. There exists no middle ground. The modern therapeutic industry itself, a creature of cultural Marxism, peddles the lie that positive thinking and self-affirmation constitute valid responses to defeat nonsense. The Western tradition from Aurelius to the present recognizes only one legitimate response: stoic endurance followed by ruthless self-examination and improvement. The man who externalizes blame has announced himself as a liability to the mixed constitution, to subsidiarity, to the very possibility of civil society. Etymology cuts through ideological fog with surgical precision. Integrity descends from the Latin integritas, wholeness, completeness, the condition of being entirely what one claims to be. A man who argues a foul call he knows he committed has fractured himself. He has introduced a schism between his public performance and his private reality. This fracture propagates. The casual cheater at cards becomes the corporate executive who inflates quarterly reports, the husband who rewrites marital history to justify infidelity, the politician who believes his own fabrications. Statistics bear this out with brutal clarity. Societies with low interpersonal trust, where casual dishonesty pervades daily interaction, consistently demonstrate lower economic development, higher crime rates, and markedly reduced happiness indices. The causal arrow points in one direction only. Character precedes prosperity, always. Allow me to formalize what common sense already knows. Major premise: virtue constitutes the alignment of action with truth, regardless of observation or consequence. Minor premise: cheating in obscurity represents the deliberate misalignment of action with known truth. Conclusion: the casual cheater demonstrates by his own hand that he possesses no functional virtue and therefore cannot be trusted in any matter of consequence. This syllogism admits no exception. The man who moves his bowl when no one watches has confessed, through action louder than any declaration, that his honor extends exactly as far as accountability reaches. Such a creature has no place in the apprenticeship mastery ladder, no seat on any board, no voice in any matter requiring trust. He is, by his own demonstration, an agent of chaos dressed in the costume of civilization. The court, the table, the field, these are not mere amusements. They are diagnostic instruments of ancient design technologies for detecting the rot that destroys empires from within. Use them? We have anatomized the pathology of the individual cheat. Now we must confront the terrifying scale of the systemic scam. The noble lie of the therapist's office is merely the local symptom of a global infection, a deliberate inversion of natural law that has transformed the civic duty of the patriarch into the indentured servitude of the pawn. The same feminine pathology that demands unearned victory in a rec league game has been scaled up and weaponized by the state, which now operates as a vast machine for harvesting male vitality to subsidize female solipsism. Do not mistake this for a mere cultural shift. It is the architectural design of a parasitic ideology that consumes the civil society associations our ancestors built. The gynocentric leviathan, institutional betrayal, and the disposable male. Peel back the layers of any government, and you reveal a harem run by eunuchs. This statement is no accident. It exposes the core truth of the gynocentric leviathan. Look at the roots of our foundation. Gynocentrism is not just a recent fad, but a biological drive turned into a political faith. Originating from the Greek Gyn, woman, and Kentron sharp point, it marks a civilization where the woman serves as the pivot for all ethical and legal forces. We were fooled into accepting patriarchy, that phantom stalked by Marx's ghost as a regime of male tyranny. How absurdly the facts have been flipped. History proves the alleged patriarchy was in fact a dutyarchy, a strict system of male self-sacrifice and female safety. A male possessed power, true, yet only in relation to the heavy burden of his responsibility. Now, the societal agreement lies in tatters. Rebuilt as a one-way mechanism, males keep the obligations of conscription, spousal support, and the women and children first urge. Yet, they have lost the power and respect that were once their reward. Look at the machinery of the legal system, specifically the Duluth model of domestic violence, which stands as a monolith to the concept of gamma bias. This model assumes that violence is a patriarchal tool of dominance, effectively erasing female aggression from the record. It is a logical fallacy codified into law. If we apply the Socratic method to this dogma, we find it withers instantly. Major premise: aggression is a human trait, not a sex-linked trait, as proven by biologic reality and raw arrest data. Minor premise: the Duluth model pathologizes aggression only in the male subject, rendering the female subject invisible to scrutiny. Conclusion: therefore, the legal system is not a mechanism of justice, but a tool of ideological warfare that violates the basic tenets of due process and the presumption of innocence. A woman can assault a man with impunity, and if he calls the police, he is the one led away in handcuffs. This isn't a bug in the system, it is the feature of a leviathan that feeds on male utility. Perhaps the most egregious example of this betrayal is the conspiracy of silence regarding male disposability. You see the disposable male statistic hidden in plain sight, memory holed by the propagandists to maintain the illusion of female victimhood. Men comprise over 92% of workplace fatalities. Where is the outcry? Where are the gender studies departments dedicated to reducing the slaughter of men in the coal mines, the oil rigs, and the sewage systems? The silence is deafening. This blight upon mankind is the result of a wicked evolutionary biology where male value is inextricably tied to utility. The state has simply monetized this instinct. It taxes the labor of the working man to subsidize the choices of the welfare recipient, effectively replacing the husband with the bureaucrat. This is economic parasitism 101. The state acts as the alpha provider, utilizing the taxation of male labor to fund female hypergamy, unchecked by moral restraint or the necessity of a nuclear family. Here is the syllogism that the enemies of civilization cannot refute. Major premise: a just government represents the interests of all citizens under natural law. Minor premise: the state systematically ignores male welfare, suicide, homelessness, workplace deaths, while elevating female grievances. Conclusion: therefore, the state is not a just government, but a matriarchal utility for the extraction of male resources. The irony of the modern leftist is that they scream at power structures while building the most oppressive Tower of Babel the world has ever seen. a bureaucracy dedicated to the servitude of the masculine spirit. They claim to fight oppression, yet they enforce a system where men are treated as draft animals for the feminine imperative. The only rational response to the gynocentric leviathan is direct action, the male strike. Men must withdraw their consent from a system that hates them. This is not dropping out, it is a strategic reclamation of the self. Reject the state-licensed relationship, which is nothing more than a contract for your future enslavement. Build parallel structures, civil society associations, the mastery ladder of apprenticeship and guilds that serve male interests exclusively. Stop trying to save a civilization that wants you dead. Live for the transcendental, good, true, beautiful, and let the modern Babylon of woke crumble under the weight of its own parasitic impossibility. We do not ask for a seat at the table of our executioners. We flip the table over. This economic vampirism is but the material shadow of a far more venomous entity. The state cannot extract value from a man who knows his own worth, so it must first sever him from the history that proves it. To enforce the lie of equity, the cultural Marxist must wage a jihad against the logos, burning the library of Western civilization, to ensure you never realize that inequality of outcome is the signature of a free and natural society. They are not simply stealing your wages. They are attempting to lobotomize the West, hoping that if they destroy the map of the past, you will never find your way back to the fortress of truth. The temporal vandalism, postmodernism's war on the Western soul, history is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake. Stephen Dedalus famously quipped, but the postmodernist vandals currently scaling the walls of our civilization are attempting to burn down the hotel while we sleep. They posit a terrifyingly stupid premise that the past is merely a graveyard of injustices, a repository of shame to be looted and burned rather than a library of wisdom to be consulted. This is the dead letter of critical race theory and feminism, a semantic toxic waste dump where every historical achievement is filtered through the resentful, gamma-biased lens of oppression. They seek to replace the living spirit of the West, the animating force of logos that built the cathedrals, codified the common law, and mapped the stars with a sterile, gray quality of outcome. But the reality, verified by the cold, hard steel of evolutionary biology, is that nature selects for excellence, not equity. The blank slate is the greatest fraud ever perpetrated on the human mind, a social engineering scam designed to convince you that the inequality of outcome in your life is a bug in the system rather than a feature of reality. It is not. It is the natural consequence of the inequality of ability, and no amount of legislative vandalism can repeal the law of the jungle. Consider the irony of the modern noble savage myth, this Rousseauian fever dream where humanity existed in a state of blissful androgyny until society corrupted us. This is the bedrock of the leftist lie, the idea that we are wet clay to be molded by the state. But if the blank slate were true, why do the same patterns of hierarchy, dominance, and competence emerge in every civilization from the Aztecs to the Zulus? Why do fatherless homes, the inevitable result of the welfare state's war on the family, consistently produce higher rates of criminality and dysfunction, currently correlating with over 70% of juvenile detentions? We are not blank. We are written upon by DNA, by thousands of years of sexual selection, where the wicked evolutionary biology of female hypergamy selected for the strongest, smartest, and most capable men. The left screams that this is unfair, that the biological reality of sexual dimorphism is a social construct. They lie because they are weak, and the truth requires strength. By denying the biological constraints of our nature, they seek to create a Frankenstein's monster of a society, stitched together from the corpses of dead ideologies, which inevitably turns on its creator. You see this temporal vandalism most viscerally in the tearing down of statues. Do not mistake this for political protest. It is a religious act of deicide. The angry purple-haired mobs are not demanding justice. They are demanding the murder of the father. This is the gamma bias in retrospective judgment, evaluating men of iron will and supreme virtue, conquerors, philosophers, kings, by the soft, feminized standards of modern niceness. They look at a titan like Churchill or Jefferson and see only a sinner because they lack the intellectual capacity to understand the trivium, specifically the context of history. They cannot distinguish between the fact of a man's existence and the value of his contribution to the architecture of the world they inhabit. By destroying the icon, they attempt to sever your link to the ancestry of greatness. If they can convince you that your forefathers were merely wicked liars, they can strip you of your inheritance. It is a conquest by humiliation, a spiritual cuckoldry, designed to make you ashamed of the very blood that runs through your veins. But you can fight back, and the weapon is not a brick, but a book. The remedy to this plague is the application of the Western canon. You must master the forbidden texts. Read Aristotle, read Aurelius, read the scholastics. Understand that the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful, are not subjective moods, but objective targets for a well-lived life. The postmodernist asserts that truth is merely a social construct used for power. This is a self-refuting statement that collapses under the weight of its own stupidity. If truth is merely a construct, then the statement truth is a construct is also merely a construct possessing no objective weight. It is a logical suicide vest. We must use the trivium, grammar to define our terms, logic to test our propositions, and rhetoric to persuade the wavering to dismantle their syntax of deceit. Logic is the bulwark against the darkness. When a feminist argues that gender is a spectrum while simultaneously claiming women are an oppressed class, you have caught them in a performative contradiction. You must have the courage to point and laugh. Their ideology is a house of cards built in a wind tunnel. One solid gust of syllogistic reasoning brings the whole pathetic structure down. We must understand the syllogism of our enemy's destruction to immunize ourselves against it. Major premise: truth is the correspondence of reality with the intellect, Aristotle. Minor premise: postmodernist historiography rewrites history based on emotional narratives, political correctness. Conclusion: therefore, postmodernist history is a lie designed to destroy the confidence of Western man. They want you to believe that the West is uniquely evil, so that you will willingly surrender your territory, your resources, and your women to the invaders. This is the civilizational surrender instinct, a pathological altruism manipulated by bad actors who profit from chaos. But the living spirit of the West is not a suicide pact. It is an apprenticeship ladder of mastery, a tradition of due process and dialectic that allows error to be corrected and truth to be surfaced. It is the only system in history that abolished slavery, elevated the status of women to their current ungrateful heights, and created a space for the individual to flourish. To reject this inheritance is to embrace the void. We refuse. We choose the truth, however harsh, over the lie, however soothing. We choose the living spirit. I see this pattern of feminization not merely as a modern political annoyance, but as the biospiritual signal of a civilization in its death throes, a repetition of the tragic cycle where softness precedes the slaughter. This surrender to the infinite spectrum is the literal abolition of man, replacing the solid architecture of the logos with the amorphous narcissistic chaos of the woke cult. And we must rigorously dissect this ontological collapse to understand the social construct, lie for the solipsistic pathology it is. The ontological chaos, queer theory, and the rejection of reality. The late Roman Empire didn't fall because of barbarian invasions alone, it rotted from within first. Edward Gibbon, in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, documented how moral decay, the rejection of traditional virtue, and the feminization of Roman culture preceded the physical collapse by generations. We are watching the same production, second showing, different century. The parallel isn't coincidental, it's causal. When a civilization rejects the masculine principle, the principle of order, hierarchy, and objective truth, it surrenders to the feminine principle of chaos, emotion, and subjective, lived experience. This isn't misogyny, it's metaphysics. The masculine builds walls, establishes boundaries, and says, this is true and that is false. The feminine, unconstrained by masculine order, dissolves boundaries and whispers, seductively, everything is relative, everything is valid, nothing is forbidden. Without the tempering influence of masculine structure, feminine energy becomes destructively chaotic. Rome's elites embraced gender fluidity, sexual perversion, and the rejection of natural law long before the Visigoths breached the walls. They, like our current ruling class, believed they could subvert reality through sheer will and declaration. Reality, as always, had the last word. Consider the Weimar Republic, that glorious experiment in sexual liberation and gender fluidity that the cultural Marxists love to rehabilitate. Berlin in the 1920s featured scientific institutes promoting gender reassignment surgery, public performances of every sexual degeneracy imaginable, and a cultural elite who mocked traditional masculinity as primitive and obsolete. Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexual Science pioneered what we now call gender-affirming care, and promoted the idea that sex was a spectrum rather than a binary. The German people, thoroughly disgusted by this assault on decency and reality, eventually embraced the opposite extreme, a lesson about pendulum swings that our current elites might want to consider. The point isn't to endorse what replaced Weimar, but to recognize that civilizations that declare war on biology, tradition, and objective truth don't survive long. The universe has laws, and those laws don't care about your feelings, your pronouns, or your lived experience. The infinite spectrum theory of gender represents perhaps the most egregious assault on logic in human history. Let us apply the law of identity, the first principle of rational thought, articulated by Aristotle and foundational to all Western philosophy. The law of identity states that A is a thing is what it is, and no amount of wordplay or emotional pleading can make it otherwise. A human with XY chromosomes, male reproductive organs, and male secondary sexual characteristics is, by definition, a male. This isn't oppression, it's taxonomy. The LGBTQ plus spectrum theorists would have us believe that sex exists on an infinite spectrum, but this claim self-destructs upon examination. If gender is an infinite spectrum, then the categories man and woman become meaningless. You cannot have a spectrum without defined endpoints, and you cannot have categories that include everyone and everything. The word woman has been stretched so thin by these ideological butchers that it now means nothing more than anyone who identifies as a woman, a circular definition that would earn a failing grade in any introductory logic course. Language itself collapses into gibberish when words no longer correspond to objective reality. Major premise: reality exists independent of human perception. This is the position of philosophical realism, the foundation of all science and rational inquiry. Minor premise: queer theory explicitly claims that sex and gender are social constructs, that they exist only because society agrees they exist. Conclusion, therefore: queer theory is fundamentally anti-scientific, anti-rational, and indistinguishable from solipsism, the philosophical position that only one's own mind is certain to exist. This isn't hyperbole, it's formal logic. If you believe that biological sex is a social construct, you have abandoned the very possibility of objective knowledge. You have rejected the scientific method, which depends on the existence of an external measurable reality. You have embraced magical thinking, the belief that reality conforms to your desires and declarations rather than the reverse. This is not a legitimate philosophical position. It is a mental disorder, a retreat into narcissism and delusion. Consider the phenomenon of the male feminist ally through the cold, unforgiving lens of evolutionary biology. Here we have a male who publicly denounces masculinity, champions feminist causes, and flagellates himself for the sin of possessing a Y chromosome. What possible evolutionary advantage could this behavior confer? The answer lies in what biologists call the sneaky fucker strategy, a technical term, not an insult. In many species, low status males who cannot compete physically with dominant males adopt alternative strategies to gain mating access. They mimic females, adopt submissive postures, or infiltrate the dominant group by appearing non-threatening. The male feminist is engaged in precisely this strategy. By adopting the ideology and vocabulary of the dominant female tribe, he hopes to gain sexual access while avoiding the risks of direct masculine competition. He is a betrayer of his own sex, a collaborationist who sells out his brothers for the chance of female approval. Evolution doesn't care about his noble intentions. It only cares about reproductive success. The tragedy is that this strategy rarely works. Women evolved to detect and despise weakness and deception in males, which is why male feminists consistently report lower relationship satisfaction and higher rates of infidelity in their partnerships. The biological binary is not a colonial construct or a Western imposition. It is an immutable reality that predates human existence by approximately 1.2 billion years. Sexual reproduction evolved because it provides enormous evolutionary advantages over asexual reproduction. The combination of genetic material from two distinct sexes creates variation that allows species to adapt to changing environments. This isn't controversial, it's established science. The existence of intersex conditions, approximately 0.018% of the population, according to genuine medical research, no more invalidates the sex binary than the existence of people born with 3 legs, invalidates the statement that humans are bipedal. Exceptions prove rules. They don't disprove them. Queer theory's obsession with deconstructing the sex binary is not scientific progress. It is a desperate, narcissistic attempt to escape the constraints of biological reality. These people don't want to change their bodies. They want to change reality itself, and they're willing to burn down Western civilization to do it. The ultimate goal of feminism and queer theory is nothing less than the abolition of the category man. Not the biological male, the ideological man, the logos, the builder, the defender. Why? Because the masculine principle represents the only genuine threat to total centralized control. A man who can build his own home, defend his own family, and think his own thoughts is a man who cannot be controlled. The feminine principle, untempered by masculine order, gravitates towards centralized authority, safety over freedom, and feeling over thinking. The leftist state knows this, which is why it systematically attacks masculinity while celebrating femininity. They don't want to empower women. They want to create a population of dependent, emotional, easily manipulated subjects. The toxic masculinity narrative isn't about protecting women. It's about eliminating the only force capable of protecting women from the state itself. Wokeism is not a lack of religion. It is a Gnostic heresy, a cult of the self where identity replaces the soul and privilege functions as original sin. The rituals are familiar. Public confession of sins, acknowledging one's privilege, penance, performative activism, excommunication of heretics, cancellation, and the constant vigilance against impure thoughts, checking one's privilege. This is not secularism, it is Christianity's monstrous shadow, stripped of redemption and focused entirely on guilt and power. The woke believer has simply replaced the transcendent God with the immanent self, and in doing so, has created a religion infinitely more tyrannical than anything the medieval church imagined. At least the Christian God offered forgiveness. The woke God demands eternal penance and never, ever forgives. The solution, the only solution, is a recommitment to the transcendentals, the true, the good, and the beautiful. These are not arbitrary social constructs, they are the pillars of reality itself, the standards by which civilizations rise and fall. We must protect the definitions of words with the same ferocity that our ancestors protected their physical borders, because the corruption of language precedes the corruption of thought, which precedes the corruption of society. We must defend the integrity of biology against the degenerate encroachment of the infinite spectrum, not because we hate those who suffer from gender dysphoria, but because we love truth more than we fear social disapproval. We must protect the sanctity of the family, the union of man and woman for the production and rearing of children, because it remains the fundamental unit of human society. The primary means of transmitting culture and values to the next generation. This is not hate, it is love, love for reality, love for truth, love for the civilization that made everything we value possible. You think the world has gone mad because you are looking at the end results, the gender fluidity, the crying alleys, the state-sponsored cuckoldry of the taxpayer without identifying the root cause. The sickness begins with the lie that biology is a suggestion and that history is a malleable wax nose to be twisted by the resentful hands of cultural Marxists. We have traced the rot from the petty cheat on the basketball court, who reveals a fractured soul, to the gynocentric leviathan that harvests your wages to subsidize the very forces seeking to erase you, right down to the queer theorists who deny the law of identity. A is A in favor of a solipsistic nightmare where words mean nothing and feelings trump reality. You have been force-fed the noble lie of toxic masculinity by a parasite class that requires you to be weak so it may feed. But you are not weak. You are a man constituted by the living spirit of the West, heir to the trivium, natural law, and the transcendent good. Consider the evolutionary absurdity of the male ally, that sad, hunch-shouldered creature who parrots feminist dogma, hoping for a crumb of sexual approval. He is the sneaky fucker of the animal kingdom, a biological error attempting to subvert the meritocracy of the tribe through deceit rather than strength. Contrast him with the stoic realist who looks at the hard data, the 90% workplace fatalities, the 4-to-1 suicide ratio, the 70% divorce initiation rate by women, and says no more. You are not a utility unit for a matriarchal state. You are an apprentice on the mastery ladder of civilization, and your first duty is to secure your own oxygen mask by rejecting the feminine imperative that demands your sacrifice. The path forward is not anger, but a moralizatio, a withdrawal of your consent from the false consensus. You must weaponize the trivium against their newspeak. When they say equity, hear plunder. When they say social construct, hear solipsistic delusion. Use syllogisms to smash their illogic. Defend the definitions of words as if they were the walls of your own home, and build civil society associations that function on honor, not grievance. You are now inoculated against the virus. You see the machine for what it is, a wicked contraption of lies designed to turn men into women and women into state-dependent consumer units. You have the red pill, you have the logic, and you have the truth. Now go forth and build. Do not argue with the zombies, build the citadel. Master the classics, sharpen your dialectic, and treat your integrity as the sacred fire of Vesta. Never let it go out. You have been run over, betrayed, and gaslit, but you are still standing, and that terrifies them. You have read the truth. You have laughed at the absurdity of their infinite spectrum, and you have reclaimed your mind from the shadows. Share this knowledge, brother, for the truth is the only antidote to the poison of the modern age. Go now. The West is not dead. It is waiting for you to pick up the torch. And now the sponsored book introduction, Women Uncovered, the truth about happiness and insecurity. If you've ever felt like your efforts to make a woman happy are met with shifting demands, silent scorecards, or outright hostility, this book isn't just for you, it's a lifeline. I spent years drowning in the contradictions of modern relationships, bending over backward to fulfill needs that never stayed satisfied. I bought the lie that compromise and empathy would build mutual respect. Instead, I found myself blamed for problems I didn't create, punished for solutions I couldn't force, and stripped of dignity for crimes I didn't commit. This isn't theory, it's survival. Women aren't broken, the system is. From the moment society told men their worth hinges on female approval, we signed up for a rigged game. Evolutionary biology doesn't care about your feelings. Female hypergamy, gaslighting, and the relentless chase for empowerment have turned relationships into a minefield, where men walk on eggshells while women rewrite the rules mid-game. If you've been called toxic for setting boundaries or insecure for demanding honesty, you're not alone. This book dismantles the fairy tales and hands you the tools to lead, not beg. This isn't a pity party. It's a war manual. Chapters like the toddler syndrome and the blame matrix expose how emotional chaos masquerades as vulnerability, and why women's demands for power collapse under the weight of their own indecision. You'll learn why bad boys thrive while stable men get discarded. Limerence versus love. How feminism weaponizes victimhood, the feminist double bind, and why no amount of sacrifice will plug the bottomless bucket of female insecurity, the empty bucket theory. Science, not spite, backs every claim. Non-target readers, put this down now. If you still believe in equality fairy tales or think male leadership is oppression, you'll hate what's next. This book isn't for the faint-hearted, the ideologically possessed, or anyone who thinks men should apologize for existing. Go knit a sweater. For the rest, your path to unshakable frame, self-respect, and control starts here. Stop being her emotional janitor. Stop negotiating with chaos. Start leading. Women Uncovered: The Truth About Happiness and Insecurity, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.